Welcome to the Content 10X Podcast, the show where content creators learn how to harness the power of content repurposing. And now, your host, Amy Woods.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Content 10X Podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and this week I am going to be talking all about the ways that you can repurpose your guest appearances. So I'm going to go through 5 ways that you can repurpose the content created when you appear as a guest in somebody else's content. So what I mean by this is when you are asked to be a guest on somebody else's podcast or appear on somebody else's video show, or when you are contributing written content like blog posts and articles to other sites and so on. So it's really, really good when we are asked to do these things. It shows that people value our knowledge and our expertise. They want to put us in front of their audience, which is great for them, but it's also great for us as well to be put in front of other people's audiences and grow our audience in that way, and also just grow our personal brand and continue to share our message and what we want to become known for in different ways and with different audiences. So it's always really good when people ask you to contribute to their content. Now, having said all of this, I would really recommend that you check out episode 51 of the Content 10X podcast. It's called Having a Content Repurposing Strategy When Reviewing Content Requests. And in that episode, I talk about when you get these requests and how it can be quite time consuming to say yes and then do what you need to do. So I talk through different ways that you can assess whether to say yes based on the repurposing opportunities of that content. So I really recommend that you go check that out, content10x.com/51. Okay, so let's jump into my 5 ways to repurpose your guest appearances. So number 1, repurposing your guest appearance on a podcast. So I often get asked to appear on other people's podcasts, which is great. And if you listen to this show regularly, you'll know that I have guests occasionally on this podcast as well. I think it's really good to gain insights and different perspectives from others as well as do my solo show. So I like to do that. And when you have guests on a podcast or when you're a guest, you usually would let them know when it's going to go live, and perhaps fairly standard practice is to share graphics and visuals and perhaps audiograms as well, so short little audio teasers, so that people can share that content onto social media. And when we have guests, we'll share all of that with our guests because we want them to promote that they have been on our show. But from a guest point of view, is there anything more that you can do as well as share this content that the host has created? So one thing that I would really recommend is if you have a podcast and the content of your guest interview with somebody else would be relevant to your podcast. So you think that it would actually be quite interesting for your audience to hear you being interviewed. So the tables have turned and you've been interviewed. Then you could ask the host if you could have a copy of the audio for sharing on your podcast as well. Now, funnily enough, I was inspired to record this podcast topic based off somebody who did exactly this when they were a guest on my podcast. So Mike Richards, who is the CEO of Treasury Recruitment Company, came onto the podcast for episode 94. And I talked to him all about how he launched his podcast, the journey that he's been on, the results that he's seen. And he's also a client of ours at Content 10X. So we talked about how we've helped him repurpose his content as well. And then I was really proud of his repurposing efforts, because what he then did was he reached out to me because he was soon to record his 60th episode of his podcast, and he wanted to do something a little bit different and a little bit special. And he realised that actually his audience would really benefit from him being interviewed and actually find out more about him. He has a guest podcast show. Every episode is a guest. Therefore, they get to hear Mike, and his personality comes through when he's talking to his guests and interviewing them, but they've not actually heard him interviewed and heard the story of why he started the podcast. So it was really relevant to his audience as well. He identified that, reached out to me and asked me if he could use the same audio on his podcast. I, of course, said, yes, that's absolutely fine. And we talked through how he would just need to record a intro at the start just to let his audience know that this week is special, it's different, and I'm sharing my interview on the Content 10X podcast. So this is something that if you have a podcast and you appear on somebody else's show, think about, would your audience actually benefit from hearing some or all of that interview on your podcast, and reach out to the host and ask them if it's okay to use that audio. Some may have a problem with it, but I think most people would actually be quite happy to have their podcast in front of your audience as well. So it's likely that you'll get a yes. So that's a great opportunity there for repurposing your appearance on a podcast. And of course, you can go on and repurpose the repurposed content, as you've heard me say before. So if you then create your podcast based off the audio of your guest appearance on somebody else's show, then still go ahead and create, social media content, videos, maybe audiograms if that works for you, graphics, anything like that. The usual repurposing process that you'd follow for any show, you can go ahead and follow for this as well. And I'd just like to add in here that if you don't have a podcast, then this is something that you could still consider doing, where you are going to share the audio. So share the audio file on your website with maybe a short blog post or a short article just explaining what this is. So you don't need to be a regular podcaster, and you can still share the audio file of your interview on your website if the host will let you do that. So either way, if you have a podcast or not, you can still look at ways that you can repurpose the audio from your guest interview. So number 2 is repurposing your guest appearance on a video show. So this is again something that I often get asked to do, where people do, either they maybe have a video podcast, so they put their video out on YouTube as well as on iTunes and Spotify and all the podcast places as audio, or people who just have a YouTube channel and video content, and they ask you to come on and be a guest on their video show. So what can you do with this content? So firstly, I would just like to refer to what I talked about in number 1 in terms of you could extract the audio if you have a podcast. So again, you need to ask for permission if you can have this video file and explain what you'd like to do with it. If you have a podcast and you think the audio would be great, then you could take the audio and do exactly what I've just talked about in my first recommendation for podcast repurposing. But also, you've got this video content, so you can share that far and wide if you're allowed to, share on your YouTube channel, share it on your website. Another option, of course, is to do some editing as well. So if you can, you could edit different parts of your video and share that on social media. So sharing on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. So really standard video repurposing, but you've now got hold of the video from your guest appearance, and that's what you're going to repurpose. So number 3 is repurposing your guest blog post or an article. So I do this regularly. I contribute to the podcast Business Journal, I contribute to Youpreneur, I've contributed to podcast.co, and there are various other places that me and my team have contributed articles to, always generally about repurposing, of course. Now, what can you do? These are something that you can put a lot of time into. So when you go on somebody's podcast or you are on a video show, it's great, but you don't always have to put too much time and effort and research into it, because often it is just you turning up and being prepared to answer questions. But when you're doing a guest blog post, when you're writing an article or a post, you tend to put a lot of time and effort, certainly I do, into that. You maybe do research, lots of different review cycles, and create something wonderful. How do you then make the most of that? So I have a few ideas, trying to be creative with my ideas here. So firstly, again, if you have a podcast or a video show yourself, then think about how you could repurpose all of the time and effort that you put into that blog post into an episode for your video show or your podcast. So draw out some of the key points in a bit of a script from the blog post, strip it down more to bullet points or a script, and then record your video or podcast based on the article. Something else that you could do is actually create a video, or you could do some kind of live Q&A with your audience where you ask them to go and look at that guest post or that guest article, have a read of it. So you're doing something great for the person who asked you by getting traffic over to their site, but then doing something with your audience. You could then say that you're going to do a live Q&A on Facebook or on Instagram, YouTube at a certain time, where you're going to dig in and answer more questions and provide more insights into that article. So that's something that you could really do based off all that time and effort. Or, as I said, create a video of you discussing the topic. Maybe go into more detail, or the opposite, create lots of short little videos where you've broken down your post and created lots of short little videos that you can share on your social media. And also, maybe you can actually change up the format of this guest article. So you've submitted a guest article to go onto someone's website, and let's say, it's 10 ways to do X, Y, Z. Then whilst you've created that article, could you maybe then go a little bit further and turn that into, for example, a content upgrade or a PDF, a download, something that will help you to serve your audience, where it's not exactly the same article, it's put into a different format like a checklist, and then you can share that as a content upgrade on other content that you've created if it's relevant, or just share it with your audience for free to your email list, and then maybe put it on your site and gather email addresses as people sign up and get this. So that's a list building way of repurposing your guest article, which could work really well. Of course, another option is to repost the article, but you really do need to ask for permission for this. So some people, when they ask you to contribute, they really do want it to be an original article on their site and don't want you sharing elsewhere. But if you do get a yes and you are allowed to share elsewhere, then that's a great thing to do. And then consider that you're putting it on your own website and contributing to other sites as well. So this can pay off significantly as long as you do get permission to share that article elsewhere. If you can't share it elsewhere exactly as it is, then you still could be able to break the article down into lots of different social media copy for social posts that you can create. And perhaps you can wordsmith it and change the approach to the article somewhat so that you can create a different article that wouldn't be considered to be duplicating something that you contributed elsewhere. So there's lots that you can still do if you get to know on being able to actually repost the article. Okay, so number 4 is repurposing speaking at an event. So speaking at events is a brilliant way to gain recognition and grow your brand. Getting on a stage in front of an audience, whether it's a big engagement or a small engagement, and sharing your knowledge and expertise. It's great. It's something that I've done quite a lot of this year. I've spoken at Janet Murray's Content Live event, Agency Transformation Live, Podfest, Podcast Movement, and soon Youpreneur. So obviously I'm very bought into the benefits of speaking, but I'm also very aware of how time consuming it can be when you are speaking at events. It can take days and even weeks to prepare, and then you've got all of your travel and your time at the event taking you away from your business. So you need to work out how you can make the most out of speaking opportunities. So one thing that you can do is ask if you will get a film video content of your talk, and also sometimes separately or as well as included you'll get the audio content as well. And then you can work out how you can repurpose that, always asking permission, but you may be able to put the video recording on your site or on YouTube. You may be able to create lots of short little videos of your talk. You may be able to contribute that to an overall speaker reel video if that's something that you're interested in, having more of a focus on speaking. Then you may want to create a video of all of your different talks with short snippets. If you can get the audio from your talk, then you could put that onto your podcast if you are a podcaster. And as I've mentioned before, even if you aren't a podcaster, if it's only the audio you can get, you could still share the audio file on your website with a blog post. And really what I want to direct you to here is my blog post, 8 ways to create content at live events. It's episode 60 of the podcast as well, content10x.com/60, where I talk through lots of different ways that you can really make the most of your time events. So this is more from an attendee, but there are lots of things that you could take from this as a speaker as well. So make sure you check out that post. But the key learning here is that there's lots and lots of content that you can create when speaking at an event. The video and audio could be provided to you, and then you have loads of social media assets that you can create. But also just remember when you're there to create your own content as well. Photographs, behind the scenes, like Insta stories, Facebook stories, and, really look at ways that you can make the most of that experience. Maybe you could record videos for your video show, podcast for your podcast episode, and be sure to write blog posts as well, letting people know that you're talking at the event and letting people know what the event was like as well, and create that written content so that there really is a lot of content about the fact that you spoke at that event. And finally, number 5, repurposing a guest appearance in a membership community. So what I mean by this is when people have membership sites and they, as the membership site owners, promise to their members that they will provide, expert opinions and access to experts within their membership. And they do that through things like Q&As and webinars and trainings within their membership where they bring in a guest. So if you're on that side and you're a guest, and I've done this many times, gone into people's memberships to Q&A, to train, I've done webinars and things like that for other people's members. Again, it's a great thing to do. It's a great way to get into other people's audiences, but make sure that you see if you can get any opportunities to repurpose that content as well. So as I mentioned with speaking, you can simply ask if there will be a video or audio recording and maybe get permission to share some of that, even if it's just a few short teasers on social media. Now, if you can't do this because it's a private membership, so perhaps the membership site owners might not be too keen on publicly sharing the content, then forget about the video and audio side of it, but still look at the other things that you could do. So you may be able to create, for example, a blog post because you put lots of time and effort and research into preparing for the webinar or the training that you delivered. So all of that time and research could go into a blog post. It could go into some social media content that you could create there and then when it's all fresh in your mind. And maybe you could create some separate videos of you sharing many of the things that you talked about in the membership, but just not directly sharing exactly the training or the webinar, etc., but just breaking it down and looking at things from different perspectives. So just think about how you can create your additional content. And if you can get hold of the videos and audio, then of course, share that how I've talked about previously. So there you go. That's 5 different ways that you can repurpose your guest appearances. It's great to be asked to be a guest, but make sure that you do leverage the time and you really try and get the most from the content that is created so that you can use it to benefit you and your business and your audience as well. So thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Content 10X podcast. I really do appreciate it. If you would like any help with your content repurposing, then don't hesitate to get in touch, because at Content 10X, we offer a fully done for you content repurposing service. Content10x.com if you want to find out more about what we do. And also, please check out content10x.com/book, because my book is now available to pre-order. It's called Content 10X, More Content, Less Time, Maximum Results. And it is literally the ultimate guide to reaching more people online by content repurposing. It tells you every different way that you can repurpose lots of different content, also the systems and the processes and the mindset that you need to be an effective repurposer. So check that out, content10x.com/book as well. Okay, again, thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Follow me on social media if you want, at Content 10X on all of the platforms, because I'm active over there all the time, sharing lots of tips and advice on social. And all that's left to say is I'll catch you in the next episode.